It was a quiet evening in Harmony Hills, a neighborhood that had seen better days. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights. The faint hum of distant traffic barely broke the stillness, but the tranquility shattered when a sharp cry echoed down the street. "You think you own this street, old man?" jeered a voice. A gang of young troublemakers surrounded an elderly man in a wheelchair. Their faces carried smug grins, as if dominance was theirs for the taking. The man sat calmly amidst their taunts, gripping the armrests of his wheelchair with hands that didn't tremble, not from fear nor weakness. His name was Gerald Lawson, a retired veteran with eyes like steel that reflected a calm intensity. The gang leader, a wiry teenager named Bryce, stepped forward and sneered. "What are you even doing out here, old-timer?" He kicked Gerald's hat to the ground, eliciting laughter from the group. Bryce leaned closer, pointing his finger mere inches from Gerald's face. "You're just a cripple. Stay out of our way, or you'll regret it." But Bryce didn't see the subtle tightening of Gerald's jaw or the way his gaze tracked the gang members like a hawk sizing up its prey. Gerald said nothing at first. To the untrained eye, he appeared unfazed, but the slight adjustment in his posture hinted at restrained energy, coiled and ready. "I'll be watching you, Bryce," Gerald finally said, his voice low and even. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Bryce's laughter rang out as he turned and gestured for his crew to follow. The gang sauntered away, leaving Gerald in the glow of a flickering street lamp. As the sound of their mockery faded into the night, Gerald leaned down to pick up his hat, brushing off the dust. A faint smirk played on his lips as he murmured to himself, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Gerald Lawson wasn't the man they assumed him to be. Once a decorated Special Forces operative, Gerald had seen the ugliest corners of the world. His career ended abruptly after an ambush left him with a debilitating spinal injury. He had traded the battlefield for a modest home in Harmony Hills, seeking peace, but violence had followed him here. The shadows of his past loomed large, and tonight, they were closer than ever. The gang's taunts and aggression had crossed a line. Gerald was no stranger to fear, but he'd long learned to conquer it. Years of combat had instilled a sharp discipline and the knowledge that battles weren't always fought in the open. "This isn't over," Gerald muttered, wheeling himself back toward his small, tidy home. Inside, the walls bore no pictures of his military days, no medals or reminders of his time in service. Yet, tucked away in a hidden compartment under his desk lay a cache of tools, maps, surveillance equipment, and a few relics of his past life. It had been years since he touched them, but that was about to change. Before we dive deeper into Gerald's extraordinary journey, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories of resilience and redemption, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more incredible tales. Gerald Lawson's life had always been a battle. Decades ago, he was a celebrated hero in the military, a man whose very presence inspired respect and fear. Missions in hostile territories honed his instincts to razor-sharp precision, transforming him into a living weapon. His team depended on him, trusted him with their lives. But one fateful mission changed everything. An ambush in a barren wasteland decimated his squad and left him with a debilitating spinal injury that confined him to a wheelchair. The physical scars were nothing compared to the survivor's guilt that followed him home. Forced into retirement, Gerald sought peace in the modest neighborhood of Harmony Hills. The picturesque name belied the decay and despair that plagued the area. Once vibrant, the streets had succumbed to the grip of crime and fear. Gangs like Bryce's Iron Fangs ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist, their graffiti marking territories like warnings to trespassers. Gerald had hoped for quiet, for solitude, but his surroundings offered no respite. Instead, they mirrored the chaos inside him. Harmony Hills wasn't the sanctuary Gerald had imagined. The community cowered behind locked doors, windows barred as if to keep out not just the gangs, but also hope itself. Gerald stayed under the radar, blending into the shadows like a ghost. He didn't intervene, didn't speak up. "Not my fight anymore," he often told himself. Yet, deep down, the fire never went out. Everything changed one ordinary afternoon. Gerald had just returned from the grocery store, his arms laden with bags, when he noticed something off. The front door of his small, tidy home hung ajar. Instincts honed over years of combat kicked in. He wheeled himself cautiously through the doorway, his sharp eyes scanning every corner. What he found made his blood run cold. The living room was a wreck. Furniture overturned, drawers emptied, and a trail of destruction leading to the bedroom. Gerald navigated through the chaos, his pulse pounding. In the bedroom, his worst fear was confirmed. A small wooden box that had sat on his dresser was gone. It wasn't the electronics or cash he cared about. That box contained his most precious possessions: a locket belonging to his late wife, Elizabeth, and a few faded photographs of their life together. They had stolen more than objects. They had taken a piece of his soul. Rage boiled beneath Gerald's calm exterior. He clenched his fists, the cool steel of his wheelchair's armrests grounding him. Bryce and his gang were behind this. Gerald had seen them watching his house, their sneers filled with contempt. But this act crossed a line, and Gerald knew there would be no police intervention. Harmony Hills had long since been abandoned by law enforcement, left to fend for itself. That night, sitting in the dim light of his living room, Gerald made a decision. The man he once was, a soldier, a protector, a force to be reckoned with, would rise again. The gang had stolen from him, but they had also awakened something they couldn't possibly comprehend. From a hidden compartment under his desk, Gerald retrieved an old chest. The hinges creaked as he opened it, revealing relics of a past life. A map of Harmony Hills, marked with strategic points. Surveillance equipment he had modified for urban environments. A custom-built drone, outfitted with cameras and sensors. And, wrapped carefully in a cloth, a combat knife that had seen him through the worst of times. Each item told a story of survival, of battles fought and won. Gerald ran his fingers over them, feeling the weight of the mission ahead. For the next week, Gerald transformed his home into a command center. He worked tirelessly, studying the gang's movements from the shadows. His drone became his eyes in the sky, tracking Bryce and his crew as they terrorized the neighborhood. He noted their routines, their hideouts, and their weak points. Gerald's military mind was a machine, calculating every move, every possibility. But it wasn't just about revenge. Bryce's gang had long been a blight on Harmony Hills. They extorted small businesses, vandalized homes, and sowed fear wherever they went. Gerald knew his fight wasn't just personal. The community needed someone to stand up, someone to show them that fear wasn't invincible. As he prepared, Gerald found unexpected allies. Maria Delgado, his next-door neighbor, noticed the change in him. "Mr. Lawson," she said one evening, her voice hesitant but resolute, "are you okay?" Gerald paused before replying. "Not yet, Maria, but I will be." Maria's eyes softened. "If you need help, you just let us know. We're tired of being scared." Her words struck a chord. Gerald realized he wasn't alone in his desire to reclaim Harmony Hills. He began to enlist the help of others, teaching them simple self-defense techniques and how to document the gang's activities without putting themselves in danger. Slowly, the neighborhood's spirit began to shift. Fear turned into quiet defiance. By the end of the week, Gerald was ready. He wheeled himself to the window, staring out at the flickering streetlights. His fingers traced the edge of Elizabeth's locket, which he had recovered from the wreckage of his home. "This ends now," he said to the empty room, his voice steady and filled with purpose. The time for waiting was over. Gerald Lawson was going to war, and Harmony Hills would never be the same. Gerald Lawson's fight wasn't a solitary one. Though he had spent years observing his neighbors from the shadows, keeping his own pain hidden, he knew who could be trusted. Among them were Margaret and Ron Taylor, an elderly couple who had lived in Harmony Hills for decades, and Maria Delgado, a hard-working single mother raising 2 young children. Despite their own struggles, these were the people who had held on to hope when the rest of the neighborhood had given in to fear. It was Maria who first noticed the change in Gerald. One sunny afternoon, as she returned from work, she saw him on his porch, his eyes focused, his demeanor different. "Mr. Lawson," she asked cautiously, "are you okay?" Gerald paused, considering his words carefully. Finally, he said, "I'm fine, Maria, but it's time we stop living in fear." I need your help. Maria's face reflected surprise, but she nodded without hesitation. Anything you need, she replied firmly. That evening, Gerald invited Maria and the Taylors to his home. They sat around his small kitchen table as he laid out his plan. We can't rely on the police, Gerald began, his voice calm but resolute. Bryce and his gang think they own this neighborhood. It's time to show them they're wrong. He explained the basics of self-defense, how to identify weaknesses in the gang's operations, and the importance of documenting everything. Margaret and Ron, despite their age, volunteered to help organize a neighborhood watch. Maria offered to rally other residents, her determination shining through her exhaustion. Word spread quickly. Gerald's quiet leadership inspired others to take a stand. Neighbors who had once only exchanged wary glances now met regularly to strategize. Gerald trained them to use their phones to record incidents and taught basic techniques to stay safe. Fear turned into quiet defiance as the community began reclaiming their streets. Meanwhile, Gerald worked tirelessly in the shadows. Using his old military equipment, he tracked Bryce's gang, studying their routines and identifying their weak points. His drone became an invaluable tool, capturing evidence of their crimes. Late at night, Gerald sent anonymous tips to the police, leading to several arrests of Bryce's associates. The gang's numbers dwindled, but Bryce himself remained defiant. One evening, Maria approached Gerald with a worried look. Mr. Lawson, she said, Bryce knows we're fighting back. He's getting more aggressive. Just yesterday, they smashed the windows at the community center. Gerald's jaw tightened. The community center was a beacon of hope for Harmony Hills, a place where children played and neighbors gathered. It was sacred ground, and Bryce's attack was a declaration of war. This ends now, Gerald said, his voice like steel. That night, Gerald called an emergency meeting. We're not backing down, he told the group, but we need to be smarter. Bryce thinks he can intimidate us. Let's show him he's wrong. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Gerald fortified his home, turning it into a command center. He installed cameras and reinforced doors and windows. Meanwhile, the community rallied. They painted over graffiti, repaired broken windows, and organized patrols. Margaret and Ron distributed walkie-talkies so neighbors could stay connected. Maria coordinated food drives and childcare, ensuring no one felt alone in the fight. Despite the progress, the tension was palpable. Bryce's gang was still a threat, and everyone knew a confrontation was inevitable. The breaking point came on a stormy night. Gerald's surveillance equipment alerted him to movement near the community center. He wheeled himself to the window and saw a group of gang members vandalizing the property. Gerald acted swiftly. He sent a message through the neighborhood's alert system, and within minutes, a small group of residents had gathered. Armed with cameras and flashlights, they confronted the gang. The sight of so many united neighbors startled the vandals, who retreated into the night. The victory was small but significant. For the first time, the people of Harmony Hills had stood together against their oppressors. The neighborhood buzzed with newfound energy, and even the children sensed the change. They're scared of us now, Ron said with a grin, patting Gerald on the back. They should be, Gerald replied. Bryce, however, wasn't finished. Furious over his gang's setbacks, he planned a retaliation. But Gerald was ready. He had spent weeks setting traps and gathering evidence. When Bryce and his remaining crew attempted to strike, they walked into a carefully orchestrated ambush. Using his drone and cameras, Gerald recorded the entire confrontation. The footage was sent to the police, along with a detailed report of Bryce's activities. By dawn, Bryce and his gang were in custody. The streets of Harmony Hills were quiet once more, but this time, the silence was filled with hope rather than fear. As the community celebrated, Gerald stayed on his porch, watching the neighborhood he had fought so hard to protect. Maria approached him, her children by her side. Mr. Lawson, she said, handing him a small box. This is for you. Gerald opened it to find a plaque that read, "To our champion. Thank you for giving us our home back." For the first time in years, Gerald felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The fight wasn't just about reclaiming a neighborhood. It was about restoring hope, unity, and the belief that together they could overcome anything. As the sun set over Harmony Hills, Gerald allowed himself a rare smile. The battle was over, but the bonds he had forged with his neighbors would last a lifetime. Together, they had transformed their community, proving that even in the darkest times, light could prevail. The storm began with a rumble of distant thunder, the kind that seemed to echo the tension building in Harmony Hills. The rain fell in sheets, drenching the streets and muffling the faint sounds of footsteps on wet pavement. That night, Bryce's gang struck again, targeting the community center. For Gerald Lawson, this act wasn't just vandalism. It was a declaration of war. The community center had become the heart of Harmony Hills, a place of hope and connection. Bryce's assault was the last straw. Gerald sat in his fortified home, watching the gang's actions unfold on his surveillance monitors. His fingers tightened around the joystick, controlling his drone, the rain streaking its camera feed as it circled above Bryce's hideout. He'd spent weeks observing their routines, cataloging their weaknesses, and now it was time to act. With precision born from years of military training, Gerald activated his neighborhood alert system, summoning his allies. In minutes, a handful of neighbors gathered at his home, their faces tense but determined. Margaret and Ron Taylor, though elderly, carried walkie-talkies and flashlights. Maria Delgado arrived, her raincoat drenched, but her resolve unshaken. Bryce and his gang are at the community center, Gerald informed them. This ends tonight. His plan was simple yet effective. Draw the gang out and lead them into carefully prepared traps. Gerald handed out assignments, ensuring every neighbor had a role to play. They weren't soldiers, but they had something just as powerful, the will to protect their home. As the group dispersed, Gerald wheeled himself to his command center. He adjusted the cameras, checked his gear, and reviewed the layout of the neighborhood one last time. The rain's relentless rhythm against the windows was almost soothing, a backdrop to the storm he was about to unleash. When Bryce's gang returned to their hideout later that night, they found a series of surprises waiting for them. The first was a loud explosion of sparks from a sabotaged streetlight, plunging the alley into darkness. Startled, the gang began shouting, their confidence wavering as they struggled to regroup. Gerald watched through his drone's feed, a grim smile tugging at his lips. They were walking into his trap. From the shadows, Gerald's neighbors sprang into action. Using flashlights and loudspeakers, they created diversions that disoriented the gang. Bryce, furious and disheveled, barked orders, but his crew was no longer listening. Panic had taken hold. "Who's doing this?" Bryce shouted, his voice barely audible over the rain. That's when Gerald made his move. From his wheelchair, he controlled the drone, guiding it low over the gang's position. It emitted a piercing alarm, scattering the group further. Gerald's years of tactical experience were on full display as he orchestrated the chaos. In the midst of the confusion, two of Bryce's men stumbled into one of Gerald's traps, a tripwire that triggered a burst of smoke. Coughing and blinded, they were quickly subdued by a group of neighbors armed with zip ties and determination. Bryce, realizing his crew was falling apart, made a break for the hideout. Inside, he found Gerald waiting. The veteran's wheelchair was parked in the middle of the room, his combat knife sheathed at his side, and his steely gaze locked on Bryce. The gang leader froze, his bravado faltering. "You should have left us alone, Bryce," Gerald said evenly. "But you pushed too far," Bryce sneered, pulling a crowbar from a nearby shelf. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just an old man in a chair." Gerald's response was swift. With a flick of his wrist, he activated a hidden mechanism in his wheelchair, deploying a reinforced shield that deflected Bryce's first swing. Using the element of surprise, Gerald surged forward, ramming the shield into Bryce's legs. The gang leader staggered, cursing as he swung wildly again. This time, Gerald ducked, countering with a swift strike from his chair's armrest, which had been modified into a blunt weapon. The fight was brutal and quick. Bryce, though younger and stronger, was no match for Gerald's tactical expertise. In the end, the gang leader lay on the ground, gasping for air, as Gerald restrained him with zip ties. Outside, the neighborhood watch had successfully subdued the remaining gang members. The sound of sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of the police. Gerald wheeled himself to the doorway, watching as officers took Bryce and his crew into custody. Detective Hayes, a familiar face, approached Gerald with a nod of respect. "Looks like you've been busy, Lawson," Hayes said, surveying the scene. "Just protecting what's mine," Gerald replied. The aftermath was a blur of activity. Neighbors hugged and cheered as the police escorted the gang away. The storm had passed, leaving behind a neighborhood forever changed. The community center, though damaged, stood as a symbol of resilience. The next morning, Gerald sat on his porch, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The rain had washed the streets clean, and the sun peeked through the clouds, casting a golden glow over Harmony Hills. Maria and her children walked up the path, their smiles wide. "We did it, Mr. Lawson," Maria said, her voice filled with gratitude. "No," Gerald replied, "you all did it. I just gave you the push." Later that day, the community gathered at the center to begin repairs. Gerald, though exhausted, joined them, offering guidance and encouragement. As the sun set, Margaret approached him with a small package. "This is for you," she said, her eyes glistening. Inside was a medal engraved with the words, "To our protector." Gerald's throat tightened as he held it, the weight of the moment sinking in. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. Harmony Hills had won its battle, but Gerald knew the fight wasn't just about defeating a gang. It was about reclaiming their lives, their community, and their hope. Together, they had achieved something extraordinary, and for Gerald Lawson, that was the greatest victory of all. The morning after Bryce's arrest, Harmony Hills woke to a new dawn. The storm had passed, and with it, the grip of fear that had suffocated the neighborhood for years. The streets were quiet, not with the eerie silence of oppression, but with a peaceful stillness that carried the promise of renewal. The gang's hold was broken, and the community could finally breathe again. For Gerald Lawson, the victory wasn't about recognition. Though the neighbors now saw him as their protector, he brushed off the accolades. "It wasn't just me," he told them. "You all stood up. That's what made the difference." Yet, the neighbors knew better. Gerald had been the catalyst, the unwavering force that gave them the courage to reclaim their streets. In the weeks that followed, Harmony Hills began to heal. The community center, once the target of Bryce's rage, became the focal point of restoration. Gerald worked tirelessly alongside his neighbors to rebuild. Walls once scarred by graffiti were scrubbed clean, and vibrant murals symbolizing unity and resilience were painted in their place. Children laughed as they helped plant flowers around the center, their joy infectious. Margaret and Ron Taylor organized weekly gatherings at the center. Potluck dinners, movie nights, and storytelling sessions brought residents together, forging bonds that had long been eroded by fear. The laughter and chatter that filled the air were a stark contrast to the tension that had once defined the neighborhood. Gerald found solace in a new role, mentor. Younger residents gravitated toward him, eager to learn from the man who had stood up to Bryce's gang. He didn't just teach them self-defense. He instilled in them a sense of responsibility and the importance of standing up for what's right. Gerald even opened his home as a workshop, teaching teens practical skills like drone building, electronics repair, and basic mechanics. For many, it was the first time they had been given a chance to learn something tangible and empowering. Among those he mentored was Marcus, a teenager who had been on the edge of falling into gang life. Gerald saw himself in the boy, a fighter who just needed direction. Under Gerald's guidance, Marcus discovered a passion for engineering. Together, they built a drone from scratch, and the pride in Marcus's eyes reminded Gerald why he fought so hard for this community. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Harmony Hills, Maria Delgado approached Gerald on his porch. Her children trailed behind her, each holding a piece of paper. "Mr. Lawson," Maria began, her voice soft but steady, "we wanted to give you something." Her son handed Gerald a framed photo. It was a picture of the neighborhood, taken during the reopening of the community center. Neighbors stood together, smiling, with the vibrant mural in the background. Etched at the bottom were the words, "Our protector." Gerald's hands trembled as he took the frame. His eyes misted, and he swallowed hard to find his voice. "Thank you," he said simply, his words laden with emotion. For the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of purpose. As days turned to weeks, the transformation of Harmony Hills became undeniable. Streets once marked by gang violence now bustled with life. Children played freely, their laughter filling the air, and families strolled without glancing over their shoulders. The neighborhood was alive again, a testament to what could be achieved through unity. The community center became a hub of activity. Maria spearheaded initiatives like after-school programs and food drives, ensuring every family felt supported. Margaret and Ron continued their gatherings, their warmth and wisdom becoming a cornerstone of the neighborhood's newfound strength. Gerald, though reluctant to be in the spotlight, continued his mentorship, guiding the next generation to build a brighter future. One morning, Gerald was replacing a broken window at the center when Marcus approached him, holding a notebook filled with sketches. "Mr. Lawson," Marcus said hesitantly, "I've been working on a design for a new security system. It's based on the traps you used against Bryce's gang." Gerald examined the sketches, a proud smile breaking across his face. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Marcus. This is solid work. Let's build it." Together, they brought Marcus's design to life, installing the system at the community center. It became a symbol of how far the neighborhood had come, from a place of fear to one of empowerment. As the sun set that evening, casting a warm glow over Harmony Hills, the neighborhood gathered for a celebration. Gerald, seated near the mural, watched as children played and neighbors laughed. Maria approached him again, this time with a microphone in hand. "We wouldn't be here without you, Mr. Lawson," she said, addressing the crowd. "Because of you, we found our strength. Thank you for believing in us." The crowd erupted into applause. Gerald, though humbled, simply nodded. For him, the true reward wasn't the recognition. It was the sight of his neighbors thriving. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Gerald sat quietly, taking it all in. The neighborhood had changed, but so had he. The scars of his past hadn't disappeared, but they no longer defined him. He had found redemption not in fighting a war, but in building a community. Harmony Hills was no longer just a place where he lived. It was a place where he belonged, a place that had given him a second chance. And for Gerald Lawson, that was more than enough. Months later, Harmony Hills stood as a shining example of resilience and unity. The once fearful neighborhood now buzzed with life and laughter. Children played on the sidewalks without a care, families strolled through the streets at dusk, and the vibrant murals on the community center walls told stories of hope and triumph. Gerald Lawson, once a reclusive figure, had become the beating heart of this transformation. He sat on his porch most mornings, his wheelchair positioned to face the street. The scars on his body bore testament to his battles, but the calm in his eyes reflected a peace he hadn't known in years. He watched as Marcus guided a group of teens at the community center, teaching them basic mechanics. Across the street, Maria organized a food drive with other volunteers, her laughter carrying through the air. It was a scene Gerald could only have dreamed of months ago. For Gerald, the victory wasn't in the accolades his neighbors offered, though there were plenty. The true triumph lay in the lives he had helped change. Harmony Hills wasn't just safer. It was stronger, bound together by a shared determination to protect what they had rebuilt. One chilly afternoon, Marcus approached Gerald's porch, his hands full of tools and blueprints. "Mr. Lawson," Marcus began, his tone serious, "we're ready to install the new security system. Would you come check it out?" Gerald smiled. "Lead the way." As they reached the community center, Gerald admired the progress the neighborhood had made. The scars of past vandalism had been replaced with bright gardens and artwork. Inside, a group of kids played board games while others painted in a corner. Marcus guided Gerald to a control panel installed near the entrance. "We've got motion sensors, cameras, and even a silent alarm system," Marcus explained proudly. "It's all connected to our phones, so we can respond immediately if anything happens." Gerald examined the setup, nodding with approval. "You've done good, Marcus. This system will keep everyone safe." "I'm proud of you." Marcus beamed at the praise, but his expression turned thoughtful. "None of this would have happened without you, Mr. Lawson. You gave us the tools to fight back." Gerald placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You all had the strength. I just showed you how to use it." The community's transformation didn't stop with physical repairs. Margaret and Ron Taylor, now affectionately called the grandparents of Harmony Hills, organized weekly story hours and movie nights at the center. Maria's after-school programs thrived, giving kids a safe and enriching environment. Even the city council had taken notice, awarding Harmony Hills a grant to further its revitalization efforts. One evening, the neighborhood gathered for a special ceremony. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the streets. Gerald sat near the mural at the community center, surrounded by his neighbors. Maria stood at the front, holding a plaque covered with a cloth. Today, we celebrate not just how far Harmony Hills has come, Maria began, but the person who inspired us to believe we could make it happen. She turned to Gerald, her eyes shining. Mr. Lawson, you showed us what courage and determination look like. This is for you. She unveiled the plaque, revealing an engraved inscription, to Gerald Lawson. Our protector, our inspiration. The crowd erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. Gerald accepted the plaque with trembling hands. His voice was steady but filled with emotion. I didn't do this alone, he said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Each of you played a part. Together, we turned this neighborhood into something we can all be proud of. As the applause died down, Marcus stepped forward with a surprise of his own. Mr. Lawson, we've got one more thing for you, he said, holding a large canvas. It was a painting of Gerald sitting on his porch, the neighborhood thriving around him. The detail was stunning, from the children playing to the vibrant flowers lining the streets. At the bottom, Marcus had painted the words, Our Guardian. For a moment, Gerald was speechless. He traced his fingers over the image, his heart full. Thank you, he finally managed. This means more to me than I can say. The celebration continued late into the evening, with neighbors sharing food, stories, and laughter. Gerald watched from the sidelines, content to see the joy and unity his community now embodied. He knew his role as a protector wasn't over, but for the first time in years, he felt he had truly found his place. As the stars twinkled above, Gerald returned to his porch. The painting Marcus had given him was propped up beside his chair, a reminder of how far they had come. The neighborhood's sounds of life and laughter drifted on the cool night breeze, and Gerald allowed himself to relax. He thought of the battles he had fought, not just against Bryce's gang, but within himself. The scars of his past hadn't disappeared, but they no longer weighed him down. Harmony Hills had given him more than a home. It had given him purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. The next morning, as the sun rose over Harmony Hills, Gerald prepared for another day. Marcus arrived early, eager to work on a new project. Maria's kids waved as they passed on their way to school, and Margaret and Ron brought over fresh coffee and pastries, ready to discuss plans for the next community event. Gerald smiled, his heart full. The neighborhood still had challenges ahead, but they would face them together. He had no doubt that Harmony Hills' brightest days were yet to come. As he wheeled down the sidewalk, neighbors greeted him warmly, their faces full of gratitude and admiration. Gerald Lawson wasn't just a hero to them. He was family, and in their strength and unity, he found a new beginning.